Okay, good evening, everyone. Here we are at the end of the term, so it's now time to check out our whole term, see what we've been looking at and what we should know for the final exam. So let's jump into it, see what's going on. This is, okay, the final exam, like the midterm, is scheduled for 1 week. It starts on Thursday of this week and will continue through next Thursday. It'll be held in the same building, in the testing center. Exam does close on Thursday early, so make sure and schedule your time accordingly. There'll be no makeup exams, so make sure and get there, get it done. You can always check Saturday hours. That's always the best time to take the exam. And the final exam will be very similar to the midterm exam. There'll be 50 questions. All of them will be of the objective variety. There's no writing involved. And study guides are now available on Moodle. And you can download that study guide, and I think you'll really enjoy the study guide for the final exam. It should help quite a bit. And let's see, just to remind you that it's in the testing services again. That's Center Building 311, brand new building. Everything looks wonderful over there. And just to remind you that you do need photo ID. You can use one 3x5 note card, remember. And be sure and check all of the hours of the testing lab. And just to remind you as well, we had a little incident this past midterm. Follow the center's rules and requirements. I have no control over those. They have control over it. What they do with it, that's how they operate the testing lab. So when you go in and they request you to do this or do that, you should just say, yes, I will do that, and then get the test over with, just to remind you. Okay, and oh joy, don't you love how computers just operate on their own and decide to just pop up and give us all that wonderful stuff? Oh yes. Now we can continue, and I will continue with something about extra credit. Remember, you do have the option of extra credit, and it is due March 15th. That's a week from tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. That is, you know, most people just email it to me. What I do with it, some people get a little impatient with it, but when I don't read them as they come in, I file them away and I work on them right after the exam, so that it helps for my organization here. It might be a crazy way of organizing it, but it keeps me organized. So if you'd submit the paper on Tuesday, I won't get to it until probably Thursday evening or Friday. So you'll just have to bear with me as I work with the grades, get through all of that kind of stuff. So anyway, it's March 15th is when it's due. And it also, most people don't do this anymore. That's kind of, you know, it's just part of antiquity now, is to mail me a hard copy. No, but if you're going to mail it to me, just so I know that I get it in time, it has to be postmarked by the 11th. Okay, let's take a look at what we have been doing for the last 5 weeks. It is, the exam is going to cover everything from the combat film through the edge of Hollywood, and including film noir and film in the television age. So let us begin with the combat film. Things that you should know about it. Okay, the features of the genre are these. Laws and morality get suspended. Okay, everything is survival. In the combat film, the whole thing that is depicted is survival of the fittest. There also, there is a switch from the individual to the group, that is to the troops. So with regard to the combat film, what you see here is different from the Western. And we always kind of talk about it in the same terms, because if there ever was an icon, an iconographic actor figure of Western and war film. It was John Wayne. He appeared in both of them. And it does change from that. It changes in the Western where the emphasis is on the individual. It changes now into the combat film where the individual is absorbed into a group. Everything here is for the good of the order. And the third point here is we see women as an emotional element, women as figures of emotionalism that brings out male vulnerability. Usually the lonely soldier, the lonely sailor, whoever is involved in these films meets a woman, falls in love with her, and his macho thing is then pretty much compromised. Okay, moving on. Also, have a good notion about what they talked about, the anti-war sentiments in post-war films. Essentially, that's what it should mean there. What we have is, after the war is over, we suddenly find films that start depicting things showing the horrors of war. And also, what we have is war films and the portrayal of racial integration of the armed forces. Truman integrates the armed forces in 1948, and the films just ignore that for the most part, ignore everything until that occurs. And then in the post-war films, again, we do see the racial struggles that was going on. All right, moving on. The fundamental American philosophy or ideology that we find in the American war film is this: we may not always win physically, but we are always right ideologically. So the whole point of the war film is to say that we may win some, we may lose some, but we're always right when it comes to ideology, when it comes to our purpose for being in war. Okay. Also discussed during this time was the significance of the OWI, which is the Office of War Information. And this was the role of the U.S. government in Hollywood film production. Unlike, for the most part, post-war films, and that would be post-war films of the 1960s, late 1960s in particular, the government and Hollywood worked together. They worked in league to produce pretty much propaganda. They worked together to shape public opinion. And the bottom line on all of this was what they call, which our film series refers to as the Sergeant York formula. This depicts the conversion of an objector to war, someone who is very much anti-war, who finds himself in the middle of a war and becomes a supporter. Often he becomes a supporter, but he realizes that the ideology is correct. And also he becomes a supporter, often through that male vulnerability again. Sergeant York, this was a real figure in World War I who was a conscientious objector, who became a supporter of the war. And the film was made with Gary Cooper. It became a very popular film during the Second World War, and it sort of set the formula for the way the war films would be depicted, would be played out. This same theme appeared even in the late 1960s in John Wayne's film, The Green Berets. When John Wayne decides to make a pro-Vietnam film, Vietnam War film, he followed the basic pattern of the Sergeant York. And we have the character who is a conscientious objector who really objects to everything, but gets in the middle of the whole thing, and by the time the film is over, he is for it and supports it. Okay. Then we move on to film noir. The key question, is film noir a true genre, which we'll get to in a moment. We know that film noir is, it's a French phrase that means black film. And it means, it was described by the French critics not only because of some of its darkness in respect to themes and so forth, but also because they were always dark films. They were just shot at night. With some of these films, there's not a moment of daylight in them. They were adaptations of American pulp fiction and the hard-boiled novels, and they were, as I just said, discovered and debuted, that is, the idea of it, the criticism of it in post-war France. The settings of film noir, okay, urban. It's always set in the middle of town, and in particular into the sleazy side of city life. It's usually somewhere in Skid Row or near Skid Row. They're just the sleazy side of existence. And one of the interesting things is the rain-slick streets. And I really think this is what caught the attention of the French critics, was looking at these films and seeing the wonderful chiaroscuro lighting effects in it, the light and shadow, and the wonderful, wonderful type of settings in which the streets are wet, the lights reflecting off the streets, and so forth. Okay, themes associated with it, of course, alienation. This is particularly true of our major character. He is alienated from the world. He's a loner, and he just doesn't seem to know who he is, which is also part of the existential world there. There is no exit. There seemingly you cannot escape this world. As much as you try, there just simply is no way out. And the character types are often amnesiacs. These are, in some cases, even our main character is something he can't remember how he got where he got. He doesn't know what's happened. He is just adrift. They are antisocial loners, as I mentioned. They are just simply adrift in this sleazy world with no friends, nobody that they can trust. And most of the time they are private detectives, or at least are involved in some kind of crime in which they are trying to solve the crime. Private detectives get away with a lot more than, of course, a police detective, a sworn officer, because private detectives can beat a confession out of you and that sort of thing. So they're very much part of that jungle, the concrete jungle, as they used to call it. The style, that's our question. That is the question. Is film noir a genre all its own, or is it simply a film style? Because one of the things that the French critics liked, and one of the things that all of us who like film noir like, is its form. It's, as we can see here, it's low-key lighting. As I mentioned earlier, the shadowy elements, the extremes in light and shadow, and often the strange highlights. At times in some of those films, you'll see only a person's eyes with a shadow that crosses over the rest of the face, or even in some cases when they're, the villain, the shady character, you don't even see his eyes. If he's talking, often it's just his mouth. There are extreme camera angles, very high angles and low angles. Dutch angles is what they call them, in which the camera is tilted. It gets us all off kilter. We're just, we're not sure where we're at, kind of a thing. Lots of distortion. Okay, also that they discussed with regard to film noir is the production code. It seemed that film noir alluded to prohibited subjects without directly violating the code. They got away with a lot of stuff. How they did it, why they did it, is anyone's guess, but they did get away with a lot of stuff. One of the things, and then the gender issues that are involved there, is one of the things that changed so radically here with regard to film noir is the female as a femme fatale. The female is in control. This is kind of the first depiction of us, of a liberated woman. The woman is the one who controls the male. This is particularly true in two of the prominent types of, or prominent titles, being Double Indemnity with Barbara Stanwyck and Fred MacMurray, in which she controls every movement of Fred MacMurray's existence. I mean, he can't breathe without her saying to breathe. And the other film being Detour, in which that femme fatale is a monster who, and it controls our hero in such a way that he has no soul even. So this is where the feminist issues come to the fore. Okay, to summarize it, film noir is a social commentary on post-war reality. It's modern mass American culture, it's the consumerism associated with it, and it is definitely depictions of the disillusionment with Paradise Lost. The disillusionment, in many respects, film noir is just the absolute opposite of the Western. The Western often depicts us finding paradise. The loner, in this particular case, in a Western that is, he goes off to find paradise, and he can find it in the vastness that is America. And this particular film noir, on the other side of that, is found inside the city, in which it just doesn't exist. There is no paradise there. There is nothing. All right, moving on. We go into film in the television age. Whoops, I got a little too, there we go. Post-war decline in attendance. Okay, we have problems facing the movie industry at this time. The first problem is what I just said, decline in attendance. It's a very interesting statistic here with regard to film history. The war is over in 1946. We have the largest attendance records ever in movie history. It seems like everybody was going to the show. The following year, it dropped to the worst attendance, and it has never really picked up. There are many reasons for that. And number two, as you see here, the one is threat of television. This is the most popular one, for everyone always tells us just the man on the street or the individual on the street. You stop him and you'll say, what was going on in the 50s? Oh, television killed movies and all of that sort of thing. But it's not the only culprit. It never was the only culprit. It was just one of many, because in post-war America, there is more leisure time. Suddenly we have more money. We have an excellent economy. We have a post-war economy that one in the first months or first years, that is, after the war, productivity doesn't stop. We're just making money hand over fist. And then there are interest in other activities that pop up, because there is so much leisure time and so much money and many entrepreneurs that we create other things for people to do. And the most popular at this time is bowling. Also, it is the introduction of another pastime called miniature golf. So you have all of these things that are vying for that dollar to get you into a theater. And then there is migration to the suburbs. Now, what that does do, I mean, yes, our series talks about this migration to the suburbs, but one of the things that it did do in that migration to the suburbs was the sudden proliferation of drive-in theaters. The car, you get the family in the car and you go out and watch a movie from your car. Okay, another point to be made here is the agreements between motion picture industry and TV. And that is later on, in about the mid-1950s, Hollywood finally accepts television, and television becomes a subsidiary market for motion pictures. We could go on forever about this, where many of the Hollywood moguls at that time refused to even let their stars appear in television. Television was headquartered in New York, movies still in Hollywood. But there was this very interesting thing that was going on at the time as well, in which if you filmed a program, you could run it again and again and again and again. And so rather than doing live television, many of the producers worked with Hollywood to film their programs so that you could continue to just make money off of it. Okay, now what did the movie industry do? How did it respond to television and the declining audiences? Well, at this point in Hollywood's history, the technical innovations. The first thing that they did was what they called horizon-spanning widescreen. They brought to the fore an old system that had been developed in the silent era to create widescreen, because to compete with television at this time had a tiny little screen, and many of them were just oval screens. It was like looking through a ship's porthole. And so they created widescreen. And the second thing was stereophonic sound. You had in your TV set a squawk box. That was about it. But if you could go to a theater, you'd get this surrounding stereophonic sound. So these technical innovations were bringing people into the theaters, and it was working. And it began with what? It started first with 3-dimension. Again, it was an old process, but they brought it to the fore. And the first film was a jungle picture called Wanna Devil. As the ad there says, a lion in your lap and a lover in your arms. You wore the glasses and things came at you all the time. It worked through a process called polarization. That was the best process. It was actually 2 projectors running in sync with Polaroid filters on each one, altering the light, and then you wore the compensating glasses. I'm lucky enough to have been able to see polarized 3-dimension, and I was really impressed. I thought that was great. I saw a film that was made in that 3D process, and I was really impressed. I liked that. The cheap way of doing it was the anaglyphs, which you have that blue filter on the picture and a red filter. And anyway, then they got wide again. Now they went, instead of just 3D, it went wide with the huge Cinerama. Cinerama was shot with 3 cameras and projected from 3 projectors on a huge screen that was curved, and this allowed you to see a film out of the corner of your eyes. That is, it was a full realistic way of seeing things, and it was very impressive with full stereophonic sound. They got cheaper with that, because then the 20th Century Fox again brought an old system called CinemaScope. And CinemaScope involved the Anamorphic Squeeze, in which a lens squeezes a wide angle, squeezes it, makes everybody skinny, as you see there in that film clip, and then a compensating lens on the projector in the theater unsqueezes it and gives you a roughly 2-to-1 projected image. It was actually various aspect ratio size. It settled for 2.351 for most of its run, but it started like at 2.65. But at any rate, it was roughly 2-to-1. And then along comes Panavision, which was a company that made the lenses for theaters. And but they also made a camera and a process using 65 millimeter, which MGM bought exclusively and referred to it as MGM Camera 65. But Panavision's lenses were so fast and so acute that it became the standard for anything that was in widescreen. Practically every company, even if you called it CinemaScope, it was using Panavision lenses, and they did it in a film called Dangerous Charter. It was made by the Panavision company, and they called that Panavision 35 for the 35 millimeter. Okay, that's it. So technical modifications for widescreen to TV, you should have an idea about that. because they talked perfectly about that, because it alters the aesthetic of your film. When you have panning and scanning, letterboxing, understand safe action area, and all of that kind of stuff. The other innovation that occurred at this time is the teen market. The studios realized that who was going to downtown theaters were teenagers, and that nothing works better than mixing teenagers with monsters. So during that time period, you've got a lot of teenagers and monsters in the theaters. And it is also at this point where low-budget exploitation films begin to take over. It is the rise of the independent producers as well. So the film school generation in the 1960s, there's a transition. The older generation that sees movies versus the younger generation that sees a film. This is the counterculture movement. I'm not going to go through all of this kind of stuff here, but you know, it's the ideological war and all of the kinds of things that are going on, the radical change in our culture, radical change in our society. The movies begin to reflect that. We get the images of women, we get the images of youth, the images of race, all of this stuff changes. And with that comes exploitation films that really exploit sexuality and drugs and lots of violence and horror. In the middle of all that, you find the blaxploitation films. These are short-lived films, a cycle of black action movies. And then the rating systems, we no longer have a production code system. What we have now is we rate the films. So anything goes in the film, and we just put a rating on it. And the changing face of moviegoers. They're younger, they're college educated, and they have lots of money. The new wave, we talked about that. French movie critics who discover American classic films. Okay, and let's see, the blah, blah, that's, yeah. The Edge of Hollywood, become familiar with modern filmmakers and examples of their works. And in our series, it's Lucas, Spielberg, and Scorsese, but also those on the fringe. For example, Julie Dash. And remember that a movie just ain't a movie anymore. And I'm not going to go through all of those genres like that. Okay. And then it's the new media, you know. It's now, rather than vertical control, what we have now is horizontal control. It's the diversification of the film industry. It's not just the movie industry anymore. They're now a media industry because they do everything involved in it. They do television work. They do video games. You have DVDs and that sort of thing. They work with cable television. All of that's there. So, okay, remember all this stuff that I just said. Get ready, take the exam early. That's it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye. Yeah.